December 20th, 1984. Greeley, Colorado. It is 5 days before Christmas. The air is sharp and cold. Snow blankets the lawns of the Pheasant Run subdivision, and the smell of pine hangs in the air. For most families, it is a time for hot cocoa, presents, and twinkling lights. But for one family, this night would mark the beginning of a 38-year nightmare. Tonight, the Franklin Middle School Honor Choir is performing their annual Christmas concert. The gymnasium is packed with proud parents. But in the Matthews household, the logistics are a bit complicated. Gloria Matthews, Jonelle's mother, is out of state, caring for a dying relative. Jim Matthews, her father, is trying to be in 2 places at once. He has to attend a basketball game where his older daughter, Jennifer, is playing. That leaves 12-year-old Jonelle, a sweet, quiet 7th grader who loves to sing and cross-stitch, to get home from the concert on her own. But she isn't exactly alone. After the concert ends, Jonelle catches a ride home with a friend and the friend's father. It's a short drive through the icy streets. The headlights illuminate the Matthews ranch-style home. The garage door is up. The lights are on. The friend's father later tells police he watched Jonelle walk up the driveway. He sees her step into the house. The last image of Jonelle Matthews alive is a silhouette disappearing into a well-lit, warm entryway. It is approximately 8 p.m. Jim Matthews arrives home about an hour later. He pulls into the garage, expecting to hear the television buzzing or his daughter getting ready for bed. But the house is silent. "Hi? Jonelle?" he calls out. "Jonelle? Are you there?" Nothing. He searches the living room. He checks the bedrooms. The house feels occupied, but empty. Jonelle's shoes are by the heater. A shawl she was wearing is draped over a chair. It looks like she just took them off to watch TV. But she is gone. Panic begins to set in. The temperature outside is dropping. Jim calls the police. This is the beginning of one of Colorado's most frustrating cold cases. But here is the chilling reality the police find immediately. There are no signs of a struggle. No broken glass. No blood. It looks like Jonelle simply vanished into the snow.
Except for one thing. Outside, in the snow, there are footprints, and someone has tried very hard to hide them. Investigators find a garden rake lying near the prints. It looks like someone stood here in the bitter cold and methodically raked the snow to erase their steps. Police later learn the rake belongs to the Matthews family. It came right out of Jim's garage. At this moment, Greeley police have no idea if they are looking for a runaway, a kidnapper, or a killer. But they know one thing. This is not an accident. Someone took Jonelle Matthews. The disappearance of Jonelle Matthews explodes beyond the borders of Greeley. It is the mid-'80s, a time when the nation is waking up to the epidemic of missing children. Jonelle's photo becomes one of the first to be printed on milk cartons across the country. It is a haunting image. A girl with a shy smile, braces on her teeth, and dark hair. Millions of Americans pour their cereal in the morning and look into her eyes. President Ronald Reagan even mentions Jonelle by name during a press conference, using her case to highlight the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
But the national spotlight does not solve the case. Back in Greeley, the investigation is spinning its wheels. The police initially look at Jim Matthews. It is standard procedure. Family involvement is always the first statistical probability. But Jim has an airtight alibi. He was at the basketball game. Dozens of people saw him. The family friend who dropped her off checks out. The church community, the Matthews were devout members of the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, is devastated. The only physical evidence the police have is that raked snow. That and a timeline of just 60 minutes. The window is impossibly narrow. Between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m., someone entered that house, subdued a 12-year-old girl, removed her from the premises, and tried to disguise their tracks. It suggests a terrifying level of confidence. This is not a panicked crime. This is someone who felt comfortable walking into a lit home in a quiet neighborhood. As the years turn into decades, the case grows cold. The leads dry up. The Matthews family, living in a state of perpetual limbo, eventually do the unthinkable. In 1994, 10 years after she vanished, they have Jonelle declared legally dead.
But while the world moves on, one man cannot stop talking about Jonelle Matthews. And that, ironically, is what finally ruins him. Steve Pankey was never on the police radar in 1984. In the grand scheme of things, he was a nobody, a neighbor who lived about 2 miles away from the Matthews home. He had attended the same church, serving briefly as a youth minister, but had left under unclear circumstances. But Steve Pankey had a secret. He desperately wanted to be seen as a genius. Years after the disappearance, Pankey moves to Idaho, and he develops a bizarre obsession: politics. He runs for sheriff, he runs for lieutenant governor, he runs for governor multiple times. He loses every single time. But during these campaigns, Pankey starts talking. Specifically, he starts talking about Jonelle Matthews. In 1999, Pankey is arrested for causing a disturbance at a bank. It's a minor thing, but when he appeals the conviction, he writes a letter to the court. In it, he claims the arrest was a plot, an attempt, he writes, to force him to become an informant in the Jonelle Matthews case. Let that sink in. He is accusing the police of harassing him because he knows the location of a dead girl's body. The problem? At this point, the police haven't found the body, and Jonelle is just a missing person file. But Pankey, in his arrogance, is revealing the unthinkable. He knows she is dead. He knows where she was.
Yet, despite this massive red flag, the police still don't have enough for an arrest. Pankey is slippery. He inserts himself into the investigation constantly, offering to help, asking for immunity. He is the worst nightmare of a cold case detective, a narcissist who is willing to play cat and mouse for decades. Then, in 2019, the game changes forever. July 24, 2019. A construction crew is digging a pipeline in a remote area of Weld County, about 15 miles southeast of Greeley. It is desolate land, flat, unforgiving. The backhoe digs into the dirt. The workers unearth skeletal remains. At first, they think it might be an old cowboy grave, or perhaps a Native American burial site. But then they see the clothes. Red and blue fabric. Tattered, but recognizable. And then they see the skull. The lower jaw is detached, but the teeth are intact. And on those teeth are braces. The dental records confirm it almost instantly. It's Jonelle. And she is still wearing the same outfit she wore to the Christmas concert in 1984. The autopsy delivers the fatal detail: a single gunshot wound to the head. Jonelle Matthews was murdered the night she vanished. The discovery shatters the case wide open. For the Greeley PD, this is no longer a missing persons case. It is a homicide. And they know exactly who to look at.
They go back to Steve Pankey, but when they ask for a formal interview, Pankey does something strange. He doesn't say, "I didn't do it." He says, "Give me immunity." Detective Robert Cash, who took over the case, says Pankey treated the investigation like a game. He wanted a deal before he would talk. But as the police dig deeper, they find the connective tissue they were missing. They talk to Pankey's ex-wife, Angela Hicks. Angela Hicks holds the key. She tells investigators that the Steve Pankey she was married to in 1984 was a controlling, obsessive man, and his behavior on the night Jonelle went missing was bizarre. Hicks recalls that on December 20th, 1984,
They had an argument about a trip to California. They left later than planned. But what haunts her is what happened when they heard the news. I was flipping the radio, Hicks later testified. Steve said, "No, not the music. Put on the news." According to Hicks, Panky, who usually banned radio and TV from the house, forced her to listen to the news reports about Jonelle over and over again for the entire drive.
But the most damning evidence comes from a piece of paper. Decades later, after they had divorced, Hicks found a legal pad in the trash at their home. On it was handwriting belonging to Steve Panky. It mentioned the snow. It mentioned the house. And it mentioned the rake. Specifically, the note mentioned that the footprints in the snow outside the Matthews home had been raked. Now listen closely. At the time Panky wrote that note, the police had never released that detail to the public. The only people who knew the murder weapon was a gun, the public didn't know that yet. The only people who knew about the rake, the killer and the cops. Panky's obsessive need to inject himself into the story had finally provided the rope he would hang himself with. In October 2020, Steve Panky is indicted for first-degree murder and kidnapping. He is extradited from Idaho back to Colorado. The trial is a spectacle of psychological horror. Prosecutors argue that Panky, bitter after being excommunicated from the Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, wanted revenge. He wanted to strike at the heart of the community he hated. The prosecution's theory is darkly simple. Panky saw Jonelle get dropped off. He entered the house, likely through the open garage door. He overpowered her, marched her to his car, drove her out to the plains, and shot her in the head. But here is the twist. The first trial ends in a mistrial. The jury is hung. They cannot decide. Panky thinks he has won. He walks out of the courtroom with a smirk, convicted only of lying to police, but free on the murder charges. For the Matthews family, it is a gut punch. For the community, it is a nightmare revisited. But the district attorney decides to try again. They bring Panky back to court in 2022. And this time, the defense tries a different strategy. They claim Panky is just a weird guy with Asperger's syndrome. They argue that his obsession with the case doesn't make him a killer, just a lonely, attention-seeking man. But the prosecution brings the hammer down. They bring out the note about the rake. They bring out his requests for immunity. They bring out the timeline. Most devastatingly, they play the audio of Panky's own words. When asked by a detective why he wouldn't just help the family, Panky laughed. He said, "You don't know what's on my mind. It takes the second jury mere hours to deliberate. On October 31st, 2022, almost 38 years to the day since Jonelle vanished, Steve Panky is found guilty of felony murder and second-degree kidnapping. He is sentenced to life in prison." Jonelle Matthews would have been 50 years old this year. She would have had a career, a family, a life. Instead, she became a cold case statistic, one of the first faces of the missing children's movement. Her killer, a failed politician who couldn't stop running his mouth, will likely die behind bars. In the end, the Jonelle Matthews story is not just about forensic evidence or legal strategy. It is about the arrogance of evil. Steve Panky thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he could manipulate the police, the media, and the justice system. He was wrong. But the victory is bittersweet. For her father, Jim, who still remembered calling her name into the empty house that winter night, there is no happy ending. There is only closure.
As Detective Robert Cash said, Steve Panky revealed himself. And it's not unusual that suspects in crimes do this. He had to play the game. The game ended for Steve Panky in a Colorado courtroom. But for Jonelle, the quiet girl who loved to sing, who wore braces, who disappeared just before Christmas, the rest is silence. Jonelle Matthews was found, but for 35 years, she was the girl on the milk carton.
a ghost, a memory. It took nearly 4 decades, but justice finally came for her. This has been the true story of the disappearance of Jonelle Matthews.